A rabbi give me an analogy. He said, look, imagine you left your home and then someone came and occupied it, and then you try to get it back, and then they went to the judge. Have you heard some of these analogies? Maybe you can.
Yeah, that's assuming that, that's taking it to a place which I don't usually go. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago. That's a bit of a stretch for me. And even if it was true, I don't think it. I agree with him. It doesn't justify. I did not live there 3,000 years ago. My grandparents immigrated from Ukraine. Their parents, their grandparents didn't live there, and I don't know any Jew that can trace his or her ancestors back to the ancient Hebrews. I did not live there 3,000 years ago. My grandparents immigrated from Ukraine. Their parents, their grandparents didn't live there, and I don't know any Jew that can trace his or her ancestors back to the ancient Hebrews. So that's a lot of, that's a lot of myth there, and I don't think it's relevant. So that's a lot of, that's a lot of myth there, and I don't think it's relevant.
Laws is the obligation of one brother to marry his brother's widow if he died without issue. Major Long says if the deceased had left a brother, he takes the widow to his lodge after a proper interval and considers her as his wife. This is also confirmed by Charlevoix. It would occupy a greater space of time than I can afford to trace similitude between all the Indian rites and religious ceremonies and those of the Jewish nation, in their births and their separation after the births of their children, in their daily prayers and sacrifices, in their festivals, in their burials, in the employment of mourners, and in their general belief. I see a close analogy, an intimate connection with all the ceremonies and laws which are observed by the Jewish people, making due allowance for what has been lost and misunderstood in the course of upwards of 2,000 years. A general belief exists amongst most travelers that the Indians are the descendants of the missing tribes. Manasseh ben Israel wrote his celebrated treatise to prove this fact on the discovery of America. William Penn, who always acted righteously towards the Indians and had never suspected that they had descended from the missing tribes, says in a letter to his friends in England, I found them like countenances to the Hebrew race. I consider these people under a dark night, yet they believe in God and immortality without the aid of metaphysics. They reckon by moons, they offer their first ripe fruits, they have a kind of feast of tabernacles. They are said to lay their altars with 12 stones. They mourn a year and observe the Mosaic law with regard to separation. Emmanuel de Moraes, in his History of Brazil, declares that America has been peopled by the Carthaginians and Israelites, and as the Israelites, he says nothing is wanting but circumcision to constitute a perfect resemblance between them and the Brazilians. The Reverend J. Betty, a very worthy missionary, says, I have often before hinted that I have taken great pains to search into the usages and customs of the Indians in order to see what ground there was for supposing them to be part of the 10 tribes, and I must own to my no small surprise that a number of their customs appear so much to resemble those of the Jews, that it is a great question with me whether we can expect to find among them 10 tribes, whatever they are at this day, all things considered, more of the footsteps of their ancestors than among the different Indian tribes. Trami and his discovery of the sources of the Mississippi, after a full of it, so remember what they found in the mounds, right? In these mounds, so many mounds in Mississippi, right? It says here that different authors have brought them hither from all parts of the world. I was at first induced to join with those who derived them from the Hebrews. It seemed impossible for me to doubt that by so doing I should be building an impregnable foundation. He then proceeds to prove their Asiatic origin by many interesting facts. The late Earl of Crawford and Lindsay published his travels in America in 1801. It is curious and pleasing, he says, in reading the travels of those who have been among these people, to find how their customs comport with the laws of Moses. And after describing the length of their religious rites and ceremonies, his lordship emphatically observes, it is a sound truth that the Indians are descended from the 10 tribes, and time and investigation will more and more enforce its acknowledgement. Alright, so this is what we're doing. Because with time and investigation, more and more is acknowledged, right? That's what we are doing. We're revealing this part of history that has been left from us.
In the course of an official excavation by the Smithsonian Institution, okay, then Bat Creek Stone went to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. They didn't understand it. They thought it was Cherokee since it came from Cherokee country. They did not realize it was Hebrew. And they published it upside down, and then they threw it in a box in the sub-basement of the Smithsonian. And ever after it was poo-pooed until some Semitic scholars like Cyrus Gordon came and vindicated it.
Cyrus Gordon, who was one of the great Semitic scholars of our generation, he talks about the writings that were found in this very area and how he was able to translate those things, translate that writing. When it was turned over, they were trying to figure out what type of Native American wrote this, and Cyrus Gordon turned it upside down. He recognized that it was actually Phoenician.
Phoenician, this older form of Hebrew, dates to the Old Testament Babylonian captivity and the scattering of Israel.